So over the last 6 months, I've been seeing a lot of headlines left and right about a potential oil shortage happening in 2022. And many Americans have connected these headlines with the prices we're currently seeing at the gas stations. CNBC went as far as saying that our oil market is heading for the biggest supply crisis in decades. And all these headlines, of course, are pointing towards the Russia and Ukraine crisis as the problem for everything that's going on. Now, yes, Russia is approximately responsible for 8% of US oil consumption, but honestly, the more I dug into the research for this video, it seems that gas prices are higher because of inflation more so than the Russia-Ukraine crisis, or even an oil shortage for that matter. But hey, every government needs a scapegoat, right? Which, guys, I gotta be honest, I used to think that Biden was one of the worst presidents we've ever had, economically speaking, but now I have woken up and I can see that none of this is his fault. It's actually Vladimir Putin's fault. Now, what's really interesting is the more I researched about where these big media outlets with these outlandish headlines are actually getting their data from, well, the numbers actually show that we're more likely to outpace demand in oil, let alone have a shortage in 2022. As a matter of fact, according to WoodMac, 2022 global supply is expected to grow by 4.8 million barrels per day, slightly outpacing demand growth. A shortage of supply is not anticipated for this year. But there still has to be some major legitimate concerns, right? I mean, a lot of issues related to a potential oil shortage has also brought up conversations with a potential energy crisis as well. But what most media outlets haven't talked about is how actually this has all happened before. You see, in the 1970s, US consumption of oil and gasoline were starting to rise, which made sense. Households started having multiple cars, and the daily commute was starting to be well established at that point. And this worried the US government at the time because they were asking whether or not higher consumption was going to lead to higher prices. And this pressure was mainly caused by assumptions made by the US, who believed that Arab oil exporters couldn't afford to lose its revenue. And well, it kind of blew up in their face because in 1973, an oil embargo imposed by members of the Organization of the Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries led to fuel shortages and sky-high prices throughout much of that decade. But guess what? We still recovered. The US started passing reform on new renewable energy sources, and well, that very embargo was lifted the very next year in March of 1974. So in going back to a potential oil shortage, well, I don't see how this is going to be a lasting problem. And on top of all this, Forbes put out a great article recently publishing that US oil companies have actually increased their drilling by 60% in the last year. And because of the significant lag time between drilling and the actual oil production, we're not expected to experience any further shortages anytime soon, as drilling has gone up 60%, but oil production has only gone up 8%. That is up until now as we wait for that number to catch up. And if all that wasn't enough, a big reason for this now temporary oil shortage was pretty much because we stopped drilling as soon as COVID happened. According to the Forbes article, between February and July 2020, the rig count plunged by over 70% as demand for oil plummeted. And by the way, I can see how that makes total sense, considering that everyone was staying home. So hey, big media, maybe that's why there's an oil shortage. I'm sorry, let me just pause right here and say that I feel like humans just don't have common sense sometimes. I mean, that's like saying, oh my gosh, I wonder why I'm so thirsty. Maybe it's because I haven't drinking any water.
Well, duh.
Alright, so I'm gonna come clean here, guys. This video was actually supposed to be about the oil shortage and how it's gonna affect our economy and our day-to-day life. But as we've seen with the research, there really doesn't seem to be much of an oil shortage. If anything, it's more of a supply issue mixed with inflation. But for some reason, the government is making a huge deal about oil shortages with headlines saying that it's gonna get much worse. And it all seems to be mainly centered around a big push towards electric vehicles. As a matter of fact, according to New York Times, Biden wants 50% of all car sales to be electric vehicles by the year 2030. On top of that, he wants all federal vehicles, which is approximately 600,000 nationwide, to all be electric as well. And it seems that California is following this push, as just last week, the state proposed a bill that would ban any sales of new gas-powered vehicles by 2035. Even the Secretary of Transportation has come out wanting everybody to buy electric vehicles. If only we could afford it. But of course, at this point, the question is, well, why? And not why this big push for more electric vehicles, but why use something that's not even true at all to push it? As a matter of fact, Biden is willing to go as far as wanting Congress to offer up to $12,500 in tax credits for electric vehicle purchases, including $4,500 for buyers of union-made electric vehicles. To which American automakers responded with the obvious, sure, but only if you give us billions of dollars in government funding for us to do that. Now, the clear and obvious answer, at least at surface level, is for more Americans to own and drive electric vehicles on a day-to-day basis to address climate change. And in all honesty, there are both pros and cons with that. To start, the pros are pretty obvious, whether it's less emissions over a lifetime of a car, or of course having Elon Musk as the face of electric vehicles. I won't get too much into the details of this, as I'm sure many of you guys can do your own research at this point. I mean, who knows? Maybe some of you guys can tell me that green vehicles are actually not green at all in the comment section. But what I find even more fascinating are the cons. As a matter of fact, there's a country that's had their government pushing for electric vehicles long before Biden stumbled into office. And to give you a hint on what country this is, this country's government started pushing mandates on percentage of vehicle sales that had to be electric all the way back in 2018. And unironically at the same time, reports started coming out about how these new advanced features in these electric vehicles were actually being used to collect data and surveillance information for the government. And the data collected would be later input into a national social credit system. Now, the second I said the word mandate, you probably would have all guessed that this country is China. I mean, who else would push their people to drive electric vehicles for the purposes of tracking them? China is asshole! As a matter of fact, according to The Drive, in order to remain compliant with Chinese regulatory requirements, manufacturers must provide at minimum 61 different data points on every connected electric vehicles it sells. It continues by saying the government wants to know what people are up to at all times and react in the quickest way possible. There is zero protection against state surveillance. Maya Wang, a senior Chinese researcher for Human Rights Watch, told AP News. Tracking vehicles is one of the main focuses of their masked surveillance. Now, the article continued by saying that additionally, officials note that the data is collected in the name of public safety, but does not specify any details about how the data is used in that regard. So my question is, if the push for electric vehicles is really environmental, then why do we need trackers and surveillance systems on them? I mean, do trees grow taller and greener if Biden knows where all my location is at all times?
Why would I not be for it?
Now, my hunch is that these cars are doing way more than just tracking where you're going or seeing what you're doing, but chances are also listening in on your conversations and gathering more data than what you're more comfortable with. And as for China, well, I wouldn't be surprised if exactly 1 year from now, the CCP had the ability to shut down people's cars as punishment for a low social credit score or going against the wishes of the government. But hey, maybe I'm completely wrong and we are genuinely in a long-term oil shortage. Now, what's more concerning than an oil shortage, or the lack thereof, is a potential food shortage. You've actually probably seen more empty shelves now in your local grocery stores than ever, and well, there's a reason for that. So to learn more about a potential food shortage in 2022, click on the video that's here on the end screen. And with that said, don't forget to like this video, guys, comment down below your thoughts, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.